I think whenever any of us from inside the university go out and invite people in to come and have this kind of conversation with us, we always find when we're talking to people who work in cultural organisations, independently, there's always a lot of interest, shared interest, in the possible benefits of working, doing research with academic partners, with PhD students. I think sometimes there's quite a practical dimension to that interest. It can be working with a PhD student, it can be a great way of increasing research resource within an organisation, for example. But I think it's more than just sort of backfilling capacity when times are tough. I think more often, or alongside that interest, is sometimes quite perhaps difficult to pin down, but an interest in working with the university as a kind of critical friend, work with researchers, work with academic researchers as kind of critical friends in an organisation, and thinking about what that kind of critical friend can bring to the organisation in terms of a broad research agenda that might range from evaluation at one end, thinking about reflexive practices research, and thinking about perhaps more abstract types of research as well. So I think one of the questions we'd like to think through this afternoon is how these kinds of critical friendships between the academy and other individuals and outside bodies can be fostered specifically through PhD research, through PhD collaboration.
One way that people used to conceptualise these sort of partnerships, and the sort of partnerships we're talking about today, is they used to use the expression knowledge transfer. And knowledge transfer in many ways came out of a scientific model. A scientific model that said, we in the sciences, in another faculty called engineering and physical sciences perhaps, we will work in a laboratory, we will make our widget, and we will take our widget and transfer it to the outside world. We will transfer our knowledge here to you, lucky people on the outside who are going to use our wonderful widgets to do with whatever you want. That terminology and that sort of way of thinking about collaboration is really a thing of the past. And one of the reasons for that is the pressure that came out of the arts and humanities to say that we are not interested in knowledge transfer. We do not have knowledge here which we are going to package in a certain way and transfer to you, lucky people, beyond higher education. What we're much more interested in is the notion of knowledge exchange, of thinking that the only knowledge that we can possibly have in this place is co-produced with our colleagues in regional organisations, whether they be cultural organisations, whether they be large museums, whether they be small cultural organisations, whatever. And therefore the mission now of this institution is to think of different formats for knowledge exchange, where the knowledge that you have can be exchanged with the knowledge that we have, and something new, innovative, exciting can be co-produced. And one of the best ways of doing that, and this is what we're partly talking about this afternoon, is thinking about the role of PhD researchers. PhDs, researchers, academics and new scholars in their own right, but also fantastic bridge people between external partners and the internal academic community. They have a great way of collaborating externally, bringing benefit and value to external organisations, but of course they draw on the resources of this institution.
I think a key context for this conversation as well is how the landscape of PhDs has changed and is changing inside the university. So a few years ago, I suppose the crude default model was somebody might do a PhD, if they were sort of quite academically inclined, they might do their undergraduate, postgraduate, or masters, for example, and then move on to a PhD quite quickly afterwards with a view to having an academic career. I've just been to a sort of faculty meeting where James and I were thinking through some of these issues with colleagues. I think that's really the minority now. The majority of our PhD students are not on that kind of pathway. So they're coming back into the university at different points in a career, or with different kinds of aspirations or interests in doing a PhD. And in the last couple of years, the Institute for Cultural Practices, very much working with colleagues in the Centre for Applied Theatre, as we'll hear this afternoon, have been developing new models of PhD research, which I think are quite innovative within the context of a Russell Group university like Manchester. So doing practice-based PhDs and professional doctorates as well as collaborative awards as well. And again, because the profile of our PhD students is also changing, I think people are coming to the university with their own professional practice and expertise, and that in itself then becomes a research resource. So it isn't so much a question of always going out to do the research somewhere else. Often it can be a question of people sort of coming in and actually harnessing their own tacit and embodied knowledges, their own professional practice as a reflexive research resource. Broadly speaking, what do we mean when we talk about collaborative doctoral research? The kind of model I want to focus on here is a PhD project which is jointly developed, organised and co-supervised between the university and an external partner. Most often in this school, Arts, Languages and Cultures, the default position has been working with cultural organisations. So we've had a number, quite a few actually now within the school across a broad spectrum of arts, cultures and languages working with external museums, theatres, archives, libraries and so on. In fact, collaborative doctoral awards don't need to be with public sector or third sector organisations. They can actually be with commercial organisations as well, as long as it is a robust external partnership.
What is a professional doctorate? It's a kind of different. It's a different kind of degree, and this is just a quote from Bob Burgess, Vice Chancellor of the University of Leicester, another sort of character in this story. And he said the professional doctorate opens up opportunities for higher education to talk with professional people who are interested in intellectual problems that arise from their work experience. So this is a kind of doctoral degree that takes really explicit account of the professional practice of the student and sits inside it. And it's about a structured programme of action and reflection, engaged action and reflection around that practice. The problem, the starting point for the inquiry and the place that the inquiry happens within is inside a site of professional practice. What's interesting about these is the freshness of the problem that's posed at the beginning of the starting process. And Simon will describe his problem in a minute.
I've got one of many.
One of them anyway. But in that they are coming from often a repeated challenge, a repeated kind of hunch or problem or question that comes from practice. And they're responding to local contexts and situated practices, rather than generally, though they do encounter very abstract philosophical problems as part of the sort of journey of discovery and framing that problem. But at the beginning, they're coming from local contexts and situated practice. And that's kind of one of the distinctions. And they focus on things like transformation and improvement of those contexts and those practices to a certain extent. And what's interesting is that those problems are related to needs of professional practice in whatever context that practice happens in. And what's interesting about this is that those needs, those gaps, those areas, they're unlikely to be able to be serviced by 21-year-old, 22-year-old graduates who come on a classic PhD route, because you need a pre-existing set of capacities, attitudes, skills, in order to both frame the problem and then do something about it as part of the research, and translate that research into usable outcomes for that context.
Praxis research is really accepted now as an approach to research, certainly by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Within that notion, there's the idea that within praxis research, it should be the practice should be an integral part of the project. So it's not an add-on; it's really integral to the research. It's about bringing about an enhancement in knowledge, but I think we have to open up how perhaps traditionally academics have understood knowledge to be defined. And it is about incorporating a scholarly apparatus. And again, hopefully you'll see how that works when Julian starts talking about his project. I think the really exciting thing for us within the Institute for Cultural Practices as well is about opening up the notion of what practice might be. I think practice research was originally conceived quite a lot work strongly in relation to specific arts practices, even studio practices within the visual arts. But as an institute, we encompass theatre in a whole variety of contexts, in theatres but also in other contexts. We encompass all of the different practices that might take place within museums, galleries, heritage organisations, and Abby and myself work in the Centre for Arts Management and Cultural Policy, which then itself incorporates a whole variety of practices within a whole variety of different scales and types of arts organisations.
Some of you might know that the Faculty of Humanities is probably the largest humanities faculty in Europe. The new Arts, Languages and Cultures school is the equivalent size to another faculty in many other universities. In this school there's about 250 academics. And one thing that the university is really keen on with the new school and across the faculty is thinking about how we as an academic body engage with our wider community. That can be Manchester, it can be the North West, of course it can be regionally, nationally and further afield. There are many reasons and sort of drivers for us wanting to think about how we engage beyond the academy. Some of them coming from national government policy. Some of them are things like widening access to higher education. Also there's a driver in terms of national research priorities. Increasingly, not only are we asked to demonstrate the quality of our research, we're being asked to demonstrate how our research impacts on the wider community. What is the impact that research has on different academic partners, audiences beyond higher education. Now, some of us, when these sort of agendas started coming about, were perhaps a bit nervous about them, but in many ways, some of the best academics in this institution have already been making those sort of collaborations, those partnerships, and particularly in this school, partnerships with cultural bodies, regional, city-wide bodies. And those are really, really important for the university.